And we're live. I love that countdown. That is so cool.
It is so cool. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Heidi.
How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. And this is kind of our pre-holiday edition of Energize.
Yes, it is. Merry Christmas.
Yeah,
It's the
Merry
Christmas
Christmas to you.
edition.
What's that?
It's the Christmas edition.
It's the Christmas edition, everyone. And we are the Island of Misfit Toys. Do you remember the Island of Misfit Toys?
Of course, we've already watched it this year, and we are I am definitely a misfit toy.
We are Misfit Toys.
But I'm Santa's favorite.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we're talking about ego and teamwork this morning. Wow. This should be interesting. And audience, of course, just like before, we want you to get involved. Merry Christmas, James. Or
Merry Christmas, Jim.
Yeah. So Heidi, ego is a person's kind of self-worth, self-esteem, those kinds of things. Is there anything that I'm missing there on ego?
Well, it could be. It's also part of the mind that deviates between. Yes, we all are CM misfits. Part of the mind that mediates between the unconscious and conscious.
Okay.
So It could be explained that way as well. And how it incorporates into teamwork is so many ways, because there is some positive ego. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think there can be. I think that there's a difference between ego that helps boost confidence, which is a good thing, but you don't want to be arrogant.
For sure. And I think a good way to know the difference between that would be respect, self-respect, as well as respect for others.
Well, so Heidi, what's teamwork? When I say teamwork, what do you think of?
I think a well-balanced tasks with a well-balanced team that is working towards the same goal.
Okay. And as a professional person, you're out in the workforce, you find that you're working with teams most of the time, or or are you working on your own?
As a leader, I've always worked, or I usually work on my own, and that's because I'm usually a leader in my position. But I feel that it takes a team in every goal. So whether I'm working on my own, it takes a good shipping company, it takes a good manufacturer. So it's always, you can't complete tasks successfully on your own most of the time. So definitely teamwork incorporates,
Right.
Sorry, I read the comments as they come in. Definitely our teamwork incorporates a lot of, I lost my thought. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was going to say that teamwork is something that you need a group of people to accomplish a common objective. And I think one of the things that was so surprising to me as I came out of school, I got my bachelor's and master's. One of the things that I noticed was, the higher education prepares us to work primarily on our own. It's very individual task oriented. You go do this assignment, you go study, you learn the material, and so on and so forth. And as I got out in the workforce and started working with other folks, I realized that, wow, it takes a group of people that oftentimes you don't know very well that you're working with, and your success is dependent on those people. And what a challenging thing that is.
Well, I think it's interesting, especially in education and higher education, there's always group work, and there's always someone in that group that either complains
Yeah.
or you got someone who's working hard, you got a complainer, you got someone that doesn't show up. Usually that voice, that complainer of the group, complains to the professor or the teacher, just like in my daughter's grade in 4th grade. I've actually
Starts
talked
early.
about doing teamwork and group work and about someone not, doing their fair share. And I find it interesting that most of the time, in my experience, the professors or teachers deviate from the group grade. So they'll say, just they give good advice. Do what you're supposed to do. Don't pay attention to them. Just try to finish it up on time, etc. But there's always some credit given to the ones that do work harder or do show up. And I always found that interesting because number one, I noticed because I'd always panic like, oh, we're going to get a bad grade because so and so didn't do this or they're not responding. And we always end up with a good grade because you or that complainer or that person that voices it like, hey, so and so didn't show up.
Right.
The teacher is well aware of that. So it can change, as far as the group goal and the grade of it in education.
Yeah, I think that that's something that needs to be more emphasized in education is the ability to work with others. I think that that's really something that would help tremendously as you're coming out of school. You're better prepared for the workforce. You understand that, hey, it's not all about me, and I have to have excellent active listening skills. I have to have excellent verbal and written communication skills, all of those things to help the team be successful. Because again, it's so interesting that, and I say to folks that want to manage people, well, you have to understand that your success is based on the success of others. And you, a lot of times there's lots of things that are beyond your control. And so again, emphasizing that in colleges and universities, I think that's a pretty big miss, in my opinion, at this point, that we need to do more of that, because ultimately that's what you're going to be doing when you get out in the workforce. Because there's individual contributor jobs, but even those, they're, for the most part, you're part of a team.
Absolutely. CM just said ego in the sense of pride and confidence is what you do or provide is a good thing, but true teamwork requires the group to put we in front of me. And I wrote down some things that make some attributes and characteristics that make a good team. And I'll read them off briefly. But a couple of things in here touches on what you just said about the higher education. So they communicate well with each other. They focus on goals and results. Everyone contributes their fair share. They offer each other support. Team members are diverse. Good leadership. They're organized, and then they have fun.
Yeah. And having fun, I think, is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, creating that team dynamic, that where it's a fun environment and not a overly rigid type of or even scary environment.
Well, I think what you just said proves you're kind of a leader, because I think first and foremost, creating a good team dynamic comes from the leadership and guidance. So if you've worked with others, you know what their strengths are, hopefully know how to create a diverse team. And that's really important on a successful team. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Learning.
I would say that a successful team, you have to have many different perspectives and points of view. You should not surround yourself with people that think the same things that you do. And it's important because we all have blind spots. like it or not, believe it or not, there is not a person out there that sees everything. So oftentimes my teammates will see something that I'm like, oh, I didn't see that. Good call. And so that's where you have to be able to set your ego aside, right? And then
Absolutely.
be able to take that input from others. And again, it's the conflict. Being a human being is so difficult because we all want to look good. Nobody wants to look bad in a team setting.
No,
And we all want to, those of us that are high performers want to be perceived as high performing, right? And sometimes you got to take a little bit of a back seat for the betterment of the team. And certainly there is the sports analogy with basketball of the player that wants to take all the shots, that wants to be all about them. And that player, while they may be getting their stats, ultimately is not making their teammates better. And
sure.
I think a true MVP high performer in the professional environment can make the people around him or her better in that team environment.
Sure. I think number one, if we're going to use sports and analogies, let's
It's
stick with
early.
football and
Energize.
hockey. But we have a couple questions coming in, and I have a few questions off what you just said, which was
Okay,
great.
let's hit them.
Let's start. What is a key component to not only building a great team, but maintaining it and allowing the team to evolve?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think that the first thing, Gabe, is you have to build a safe environment. And what do I mean by a safe environment? Well, it has to be okay for someone to say something that maybe others are like, I'm not sure about that. You got to be really non-critical of your teammates. Your team is sacred. The people on your team are sacred. There is no attacking, making fun of, any of that condescending talk, none of that. So I think that's the first thing is you have to establish a safe environment. And oh, by the way, the leader is not above the team. The
Absolutely.
leader is part of the team. So that means anything that the team is asked to do, the leader's doing too. I think that the worst teams, where you get really poor performance is where the leader goes, okay, go off and do that work and bring it back to me and I will deem sufficiency or insufficiency. No,
Right.
leaders got to go out there with you and get their hands dirty as well. So build a safe environment. And then the second part is, which is a great question, is how do you keep that team going, and how do you allow it to evolve? Well, you're going to sometimes have people come in and out of a team. The key, I think, is you're not letting 3 or 4 people go off and then bring in 3 or 4 new people at once. Maybe you're bringing one person in, and it's just like, again, human beings, we're not that different than our animal friends or our canine friends. If you have a pack of dogs, if you have dogs, the older dogs kind of go, here's, the young pup, here's how we behave, here's how we do things. And so, yes, you will
Good
have
point.
team members go in and out, but you also need to keep that continuity of the people that have been around and understand the ground rules, and they kind of keep people in check, right? So I think that's an important piece as well, is to make sure that you're not getting you're not replacing your entire team at once, so that kind of thing.
I think those are all good points for sure. Being as someone higher tenure or older, being a good role model certainly is key to setting the tone for the group if there's any younger ones or less tenure. Another aspect I think is a key component would be knowing the goals. being clear with the goals at hand. So whether that's a reminder, to stay on task with a certain goal, or being proactive and speaking about the goal at the beginning of each meeting, or keeping it in the string of emails, however you all, or Slack, or however the group communicates, it's important to keep that goal, that group goal in mind. And I think that's a key way of knowing when you're working from ego or not working from ego is, are you working with that goal in mind? What is your agenda? And you brought up a key word, which a few minutes ago, you mentioned high performing. We all want to be high performing. Well, we all do, but I would certainly say that that comes from ego, because when you said that, I always want to be a high performer, and I'm easily inspired to high perform. But I think that comes from my ego. So when it comes to not working out of your ego, there is no good and bad. It's just is. And
Mm-hmm.
an author that helped me discover that early on a few years ago was Eckhart Tolle. He speaks a lot about the ego, how to remove the ego, how to recognize that you're working from the ego.
Right. Right.
Um, I definitely recognize quite often when I'm working from an ego, and it's usually when I can't let my point go. So most
Yeah.
of the time, I'm not aggressive and getting my point across to the other person, but in my head, I'm still thinking about my point, you know?
Right. Are you thinking about it right now? Are you good?
I was actually gonna make a joke, but yes, yes, I'm thinking about my point to make next. I'm not even listening to you, Mike.
Uh,
Carry on.
yeah. No. It's such a it's yeah. The two things, and as you point out, ego is important because without ego, I think it's almost impossible to be high performing, right? And the challenge becomes when I sit in that team environment and I worry about the optics or credit or being the smartest person in the room, those kinds of things. When I start to think about me, then I should go, wait a minute, that's a personal thing and it's not about the team. And if I want to be successful, I have to set those things aside and just, leave them over here and move forward with the team.
So how do you when that is a good point. So remember, when you're coming from a place of yourself, that's usually the ego involved. Um, a lot of times I've recognized in work that no matter how professional someone is and how good of a person, they want some personal fulfillment or gratitude out of your conversations.
Hmm.
So sometimes I, as a leader, can get confused or ponder, how do you gratify and support that person with the conversations that are off topic, even though they think it's topic, it's clearly away from the goal. How do you gratify them and not make them feel small by going back to the goal at hand in the conversation
Oh, that's an interesting question. How do you kind of redirect it back to the bigger picture?
without making them feel small?
Yeah. No, and I think you always thank people for their input, right? I think that
Oh, good.
everyone,
It seems simple, but that's a good point.
yeah, you thank them for, hey, that's a great point, and let that kind of marinate. Don't immediately redirect, but then gently guide back to the bigger picture. I think that that's one strategy, and we've talked about quite a bit. There's been all sorts of talk about offices and not being in offices and being remote and all of those things. In my opinion, that the folks that can thrive on a team have done great during the pandemic. I think it's the people with the egos that have really struggled, because they're not physically in the conference room, and it's harder for them to be the smartest person in the room, to have all of these facts, to interrupt, and for
To have that
leaders
audience.
yes, and for leaders that are all about themselves, they don't get to walk around a huge office building with their coffee cup like the movie, and just kind of do nothing, right?
I never thought of it that way, but that is a really insightful point because number one, they don't have the audience. They don't have that gratification that they get off of the off-topic conversations,
Right.
so that is very, very interesting. MJ says, Brandon Eastman, love the way you wrap that up in 6 words. Brandon he is definitely an inspirational communicator, wrapping that up. And then Monique says, they don't
Hey,
have the
Monique.
ability to interrupt the doers. Yes.
That's
Yes.
right. That's right.
I feel like my ego is getting involved attacking the egotistical person because I feel like we truly do work together because these are things that can trip me up a little bit. The number one parking spot.
Yeah, there's all sorts of hierarchical things that folks do to establish their dominance in a team, and people notice that. It's something that maybe you think they don't see, but they see the things that a person is doing in the confines of the team to make them elevated above you. And again, if you are going to have a truly well-functioning team, everyone's on the same level. I don't care what your title is. I don't care how many years experience you have versus the next person. Everyone is on the same level. And when you have everyone on the same level, it's amazing what a team can do, because there's a lot of mutual respect that's there. But if you have
go ahead.
If your team is out of balance, where you've got a couple of people are at this level and they don't have to do that because they don't get their hands dirty with this task, that's not a well-functioning team.
Yeah. I think going back to that list I read off, organized was something I hadn't thought about before as a leader. MJ, I completely agree. I'm going to throw her comment up because I was thinking this as well when you were talking, is think of each person on your team as a gift. We all have gifts to bring, but being organized is an indicator of teamwork or not teamwork. And I never thought of that. Now, if someone wasn't organized, I would recognize that symptom, or a group wasn't organized, and try not to judge them or see where it may have gotten in the way of completing that goal. But I never thought that it could be an indicator until I read that of bad teamwork.
Right.
And so I kept Carl's comment up because I wanted to see what you thought about him saying be proactive in managing conflict. Conflict meaning different ideas, methods, style, turf wars, and big egos. How do you coach to performance?
Yeah. And again, I think an effective leader establishes the ground rules very early. All right. And they go, all right, here's what we are all about. Here are the objectives of the team. Here's what's expected of everyone in terms of respect for other teammates. And things outside of that will not be tolerated. And they also hold themselves to the same standard that they're holding their team, right? And I see that quite a bit, where a leader, a coach in sports, they will expect things of their teams that they're not willing to do.
Yeah, you see that a lot. And I think that
and when you see that, immediately you lose respect for that individual. The team does.
Yeah.
And so, again, building that foundation is so important. Here are the ground rules. Here is what is acceptable behavior. Here's what's not acceptable behavior. And I'm holding myself to the same standard that I'm holding you. I think that's critical, because if you don't establish those boundaries early, then you start to have the egos, the turf wars, and people will watch. If you're tolerant of those behaviors, it becomes a free for all.
Yeah. One thing I've always liked to do was, when addressing the goals, I always also, in front of the group or in group meetings, addressed individual goals. So that way, if someone got off, some people can overwork, and that's out of ego as well. Generosity can be to a fault, and I have done that myself. And so when you're taking a workload off of someone just because you understand why they're behind, or it's not up to you, it's up to the team to agree that you complete both jobs. So it's on that group. So it's important that the group is aware of individual goals, as well. So that in case of any changing, etc. And Raymond, this is a great question. Does the best leader need to be passive or aggressive, or to be a little of both?
Oh, that's a great question, Raymond. I think that you have to be both. I think you
Yeah.
need to know when to be aggressive and then when to sit back, right? And here's the thing. Again, human beings are so fascinating. You can have a high performing, well functioning team that all of a sudden starts to get off the tracks a little bit.
Yeah.
And and
And they usually do.
I call it calibration, where you have to come back every once in a while and go, wait a minute, here's what's important to us. We're starting to slip a little bit. And that's important, because if you just say, hey, we're great, we're great, we're great, our tribe is great, we're doing wonderful things, our team is great, whatever, what happens is you start to, with any group, is performance starts to slide a little bit. We get a little bit comfortable. It's just part of being a human being.
Absolutely.
And a excellent leader will go, well, wait a minute, okay, we need to reset here. Okay. And it's important that the team members go, oh yeah, I have got a little bit lax with managing this aspect or this task, and they kind of pull it together.
Yeah. CM says, I would submit that the best leader needs to be perceptive enough to recognize what is necessary to get the best out of each team member.
Mm-hmm.
I will agree with that. But I would also like to add that a leader could get construed, or what word am I looking for? A leader can be sometimes leaders have personal relationships with their employees where they click more.
Mm-hmm.
They identify more with that employee. They work together longer. So they could lead. Good leaders also can have the wool over their own eyes. And I think it's important to remember, as a leader, whether passive or aggressive or assertive, is a leader is a learner. So what I think is important is a leader is no different than you and I, for the most part, but they just take the time to learn how to deal with conflict, how to recognize what is, because if they don't remember that leading is learning, they're going to fall off, their own work by not truly recognizing what is.
Yeah.
Because they can be misconstrued by relationships, or, professionally or personally.
Well, yeah, and CM, you're right in that you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of your team. I mean, you have to. And if there is a weakness that's on your team, then the leader has to go out and fill address that weakness. Okay. And it's important because an effective leader puts everyone in a position where they can be successful. And so
Very good point. Very good.
You're evaluating the needs of the team. You're going, hey, I don't have this role filled. I need to fill this role. And what's difficult sometimes is when you're on a team and your task gets kind of taken away and given to somebody else, and you go, well, wait a minute, that was my task. And well, the person that's getting the task might be better than you at it. We all have to kind of do those reality checks of, all right, well, wait a minute, no, this is actually better for the team. This person's a better writer than I am, and just because it's being taken away from me doesn't mean that I'm failing. It just means we're setting the team up better for success.
Great point.
And team success is my success, and that's what's most important. Or I can get upset about it and pout and then tank things and then really try to torpedo passively aggressively the team. And you see that a lot. I mean, you see that a lot, is that folks get upset and they get emotional, and they're not going to directly do anything that's very obvious, but they're going to be incredibly passive aggressive in their efforts to torpedo the team's efforts.
Sure. And you can recognize that.
Oh, for sure.
What
and they think that you can't, but you can definitely see it.
Yeah. What do you do then for the person who's better at everything than anyone? So the person that's best at everything, what do you do for them? Just kidding.
Yeah, I was going to say, who is there that person out there? That's not me.
Two things I wanted to bring up that haven't come up. The first is honesty. So it's so important when you're being honest, or when the team is being honest. That is a indicator that you're not working out of ego. There's nothing to hide up. There's no hidden agenda or agenda that you want to push through or manipulate. It's important to be honest. And that is as the leader and as the team member. So how honest are you as a leader? So when you know someone on the group is dropping the ball, I feel that you don't need to call that person out. You just reshift individual agendas and make it known to the group. The group doesn't need a reason, right? Or do you need to be honest? Because I think honest is very important in a team.
That's a tricky one. So as a teammate, and I see my fellow teammate that maybe is not performing, that's struggling, I think it's totally appropriate to encourage, right? And I think that positive encouragement can go a long way. And I also think that if everyone is coming to the table, we're measuring where we are on things, ultimately nobody wants to look like they're being left behind, right? And so there is that. Now, if you're a leader and you have a struggling person on the team, I think that it's better to have a difficult conversation with that team member early than it is to let that kind of go on, because the team's watching and they're going, wonder if Heidi's going to let Mike get away with doing nothing, right? And so they're watching. Now, Heidi, should you reprimand me in front of the entire team? Absolutely not.
Right.
And I early in my professional career, I worked at a plant where all the managers would sit around in a conference room every morning, and they would give updates, right? And it was interesting because you could very quickly find yourself in a situation where you're defending or trying to justify actions taken for your department in front of everyone, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's better to go, you know what, hey, let's, if you're the team member and your leader is saying, hey, can we move this conversation offline? Because people, when they start to see these types of power, I'll call them power struggles, it really messes with the team dynamic. So there are things that we should be open and honest with our team members, but not everything needs to get broadcast to the team.
I think that's a good leader trait, knowing what broadcasting and honesty do not go hand in hand. And the second thing I was going to mention earlier was respect. And John Shelton hit it on the head. It's all about respect. If you have it, you can correct and get the team back on track.
Right.
So, respect and honesty is very important in teamwork, and it's important to remember that.
And I think that the highest functioning teams, whether it be in the professional world or in sports, if you look very closely, those people all care about each other.
Absolutely, yeah. And it
And
comes from respect, I think, first.
maybe it is. Maybe it does. I think that there, if you watch them though, there's not the envy and the well, I gotta say position and say something in a
We know
meeting.
their role.
Yeah, because how
Mhm.
many times have we been in a meeting where someone speaks up and says something that contributes absolutely nothing to anything, and everyone
Yeah.
goes, you know, well, there's where ego is getting put ahead of the team objectives, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think bringing up a team, or sports related is a good point. They're also usually pretty lucky to work, especially professional sports, with others that have as much skin in the game, no matter their role or position. And I think that's why it's so important to be around, hang around, surround yourself with people that you do admire and respect, because that's where, it is a well balanced, and in the workplace you don't always get that choice, but most of the time if you have a good leader, they're all, keeping the end goal in mind, with their workload. Most of the time in our professional environment, you got to remember people aren't out to get you or to take advantage. Even though it feels like it sometimes, they truly aren't. Everyone wants to contribute. Like you said, everyone wants to do a good job. And when a good leader keeps respect, honesty, the goals, the individual goals, all of those things, managing conflict, like Carl said, all of those things that up front and in the beginning, um, it's easy to encourage that. In itself encourages each individual to perform well.
Yeah, and again, it's so fascinating. I'm a student of human behavior. I should have majored in psych. I did not, but it's so interesting to me to see how these human characteristics fit into productivity. And again, the numbers are stunning. Where right now about 75% of the workforce says, you know what, I don't really love my job, you
That
know?
is,
And you think about, what does that mean in terms of lost value for companies? And companies are around to make money. I mean, that's just the way it is, right?
yeah,
And you go, well, show me a company that doesn't have to have effective teams. There are none. You have
there are
to,
none.
yeah, unless you're a one person show, you're a startup and an entrepreneur, you have to have effective teams. And I think that the psychology of teamwork is something that is undervalued and really, unfortunately, not addressed in companies today. What do you think, Heidi?
I think that's a really good point. I think it is undervalued. I would even go out there and say that I've undervalued it in many ways in the past. Um, I find it interesting. MJ mentioned trust comes into play. I find it interesting that although you've mentioned it not in this word, but it hasn't came up too much, trust. That's so important, and I'm a
Mhm.
little embarrassed I didn't think about it in the sense that honesty and trust and respect kind of go hand in hand. But when the team trusts each other, I would say that's probably the best way to prevent ego from getting involved is create, an atmosphere of trust. Um, I so what do you think of that? The fact that it hasn't come up, that's a great point.
Mike, does that
Jim.
apply to the federal government? That's completely different. Completely different, Jim. Yeah, no, trust is essential. If you trust your teammates, then your team will have that safe environment. And again, I bring it back to having a safe environment. If people, I put it like this: if you have a fear-based environment, people are like turtles. You're only going to stick your head out so far, right? Because you
Yeah.
don't want to get it chopped off. But if you feel like, hey, I'm safe here. I can mess up and it's okay. I can say the wrong thing and it's okay. I can have a bad week. I can have a bad day, whatever. It's a safe environment because my teammates have my back no
Yeah.
matter what.
And you trust
Then
that.
you start to get people to go, you know what? We're doing it like this. We've been doing it like that forever, but why don't we do it like this? And they start to take chances with each other. And the team and teammates go, yeah, why are we doing it? Why don't we try that? And then that's where you start to get innovation. That's where you start to get market separation from competitors. And you start to really perform in a special way that at the competitor, at ABC competitor, where you have to rule by fear and that's the way you motivate people, you're
Right.
only going to get this level of performance. You will never get up here. And if you're okay with right here, then great. But
Right.
I for one hate mediocrity. I just hate it, right? And I think that in general, and kind of bringing it back to young professionals that are coming out of school, you're very well equipped to be mediocre. And I hate to say that, but I think that's the reality. Is you're very well equipped to be mediocre, and we're not teaching students how to be great, and that's why we do Energize.
Oh, we're all just learning from you, Mike. No, I agree. I think you brought up a good point, not just in Energize, but there's now a plethora of information out there or discussions or roundtables that you can be involved in. And we hope that it's Energized because we all have something to learn and that'll make us perform better. But I agree. You bring up some good points. You really bring up some good points coming out of college because and at that age, mid 20s or early 20s, that's a good idea to focus there because people want to succeed so much. Hopefully, and we're kind of past the hustler stage, but people want to succeed so much and perform so much that it's important that they understand they don't have to wait until their 30s, you know,
Yeah,
because of things like this, Energize.
exactly. And I think that the best, highest performing teams, you have a great mix. You have a great mix of young folks, older folks, and it's fascinating to see the millennials and the Gen X and everybody else. And it can be done. People say, you know, HR people might say, oh, well, these people just won't work together. It can't happen. And I beg to differ. I think that it's all about creating that cohesive, safe team environment where everyone's valued. Everyone feels like, hey, we can set our egos aside, and that's where you start to get special things happen. And how do we get younger generation on? Tell your friends, tell your kids, tell your friends.
For sure. I think younger generation on this would be ideal, just to get their points and contributions into this conversation as well. A lot of younger people do not comment and engage on LinkedIn as much as someone in their 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s. So, but yeah, we should be proactive in that.
And I've talked to some, and they're like, well, I don't want to say something wrong or something embarrassing. There's no wrong answer.
Right.
Be part of the community. And that's one of the great things about LinkedIn. It is not like these other platforms where people just viciously attack other people. I mean, it's vicious. And two things. The one thing is, I always say, think about the person that's taking the time to type in a comment attacking someone else. How empty their life must be, right? Because they're not trying to do anything. They're probably very sedentary, not very successful, all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And so always remember that, and we have such a critical society. And I go, yeah, everyone, it's easy to be a critic. It takes zero intellectual ability to say, oh, I didn't like that, or that was bad. That was a terrible live stream. Well, how many have you done?
Right.
You know?
Or how did you make it better?
Yeah.
My boss has a really good statement. My current boss in this position, he always says, how can I help? Now, he doesn't say that, you know, in all conversations, but when there's conflict, when there's a miscommunication, or when there's confusion, he said, instead of saying this, and this, he says, how can I help? And that allows, good question, Morgan. I was going to ask this too after I mentioned this. And that allows you as the receiver of that question to reprioritize and reassess. Okay, what exactly do I need help with? Or, you know, because now you need to communicate that across. So, yeah. For sure, MJ. Right out of college. I agree. Well, guys.
What a fun topic. And next time we're talking about asking for help. How do you ask for help? When do you know you should ask for help? And there's some ego involved there too.
Absolutely.
Right?
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So next topic, asking for help. Folks, have a wonderful Christmas. Be safe, be healthy, enjoy. And we'll see you back here on Energize soon. Woo!
Are we going to be back Tuesday?
I think we're back Tuesday.
Okay, yeah, we'll be here a week from today at 8 a.m. Eastern. Bye, guys. Thank you all. Merry Christmas.